You really drive her to the airport?
What happened to Phoebe?
Do you remember being 17? That strange, electric space between childhood and adulthood, when you're old enough to crave freedom, yet still young enough to believe that nothing truly terrible could ever happen to you. It's the age when dreams feel within reach, when mistakes seem like adventures, when first love consumes everything, and when you're desperately trying to figure out exactly who you're meant to become. Phoebe Bishop was 17. She had plans burning bright in her mind. She had fire in her spirit. And she had just taken her first real, terrifying step toward independence. Then, on one seemingly ordinary morning in May, she simply disappeared. What began as a normal day in a quiet Australian town would spiral into something far more sinister. A story that would raise haunting questions, not just about where Phoebe went, but about the people she trusted and the dark secrets festering behind closed doors. This case doesn't begin with a crime scene. It begins with a girl desperately trying to break free, and the deafening silence she left behind. Let's dive in. Phoebe Jade Bishop grew up in the rural town of Gingin, nestled in Queensland, Australia, roughly 50 kilometers west of Bundaberg. Picture the kind of place where everyone knows your name, your family history, and probably what you had for breakfast. And Phoebe? She absolutely stood out. Her family described her as strong-willed, sassy, and overflowing with heart. Music pulsed through her veins, and she wasn't afraid to speak her truth, even when others didn't want to hear it. Phoebe attended the Y School in Bundaberg, an alternative education program specifically designed for students who needed extra support to thrive. Like countless teenagers before her, she hungered for independence and space to spread her wings. But what happened next would set her on a collision course with tragedy. After a recent falling out with her mother, the kind of explosive argument that feels earth-shattering when you're 17, Phoebe made a decision that would change everything. She moved out of the family home. She ended up in a shared house with two adult roommates, 33-year-old Tenna Bramley and her partner, 34-year-old James Wood. She was just 17. They were in their 30s. We'll circle back to that disturbing detail. At the time, her family wasn't immediately alarmed by the significant age gap. Tenna had previously worked for Phoebe's mother, who owned and directed a business connected to Australia's National Disability Insurance Scheme. It wasn't a random arrangement. There was a connection, a thread of trust. And by all accounts, Phoebe seemed genuinely excited about something on the horizon, a 10-day trip to visit her boyfriend in Perth. She had scrimped and saved every dollar herself, planning every detail with the meticulous care only teenage love can inspire. She was ready. She was hopeful. And then came the day everything shattered. Search efforts will continue today for missing 17-year-old Phoebe Bishop, who was last seen near Bundaberg 11 days ago. The police had mobilized everything they could. Specially trained dog squads, the kind that detect human remains, were deployed to Goodnight Scrub National Park, about an hour west of Bundaberg. That's where the search was intensifying for the missing teenager. Officers had already seized multiple items from the national park over the weekend. Drones buzzed overhead while police helicopters swept the landscape below. The search was set to resume with renewed urgency. Her mother, absolutely shattered, had taken to social media with a heart-wrenching plea. She described Phoebe as a sunflower amongst a field of wildflowers, a beautiful soul who stood out in any crowd. In a touching gesture of hope, she encouraged all Queenslanders to leave their porch lights on overnight, creating a beacon to guide Phoebe home. But here's what should have been a simple story. Phoebe was supposed to board a flight from Bundaberg to Perth to visit her boyfriend. She had planned everything meticulously, down to the smallest detail. Her bags were packed, her ticket was booked, her heart was full of anticipation. But she never made it onto that plane. Her roommates, Tenna and James, painted a picture of a chaotic morning. They claimed Phoebe woke up late, was visibly stressed about missing her flight, and they rushed her to the airport around 8:30 a.m. According to them, that was the last time they ever saw her alive. But there was one massive, glaring problem with their story. Phoebe never appears on a single frame of airport surveillance footage. She never printed a boarding pass. Never showed identification. Never went through security. She simply vanished into thin air. Her boyfriend received one final, chilling phone call from her that morning. He described hearing what sounded like yelling, desperate, frightened voices, followed by an ominous silence that stretched on forever. After that, no texts, no social media activity, nothing. By the next morning, when hope had curdled into fear, Phoebe's mother reported her missing. Police immediately classified the disappearance as suspicious, and they were absolutely right to be concerned. The roommates provided detailed descriptions of what Phoebe was wearing when they supposedly dropped her off: a green tank top, gray sweatpants, and she was pulling a black suitcase behind her. Yet none of these items, not a single piece of clothing, not the distinctive suitcase, appeared on any CCTV footage from the airport or surrounding areas. Then came the first major breakthrough that would blow their story wide open. Surveillance cameras positioned outside the airport captured something that contradicted everything Tenna and James had claimed. The footage showed Tenna's gray Hyundai EX35 driving away from the airport area at 10:30 a.m., a full 2 hours after they initially claimed they had dropped Phoebe off. But here's what made it even more suspicious. The car wasn't taking a main road back toward town. Instead, it was heading down a back route, a lonely path that led toward isolated rural scrubland. That single detail cracked their story wide open, because suddenly this wasn't just a missing person case anymore. It was a warning sign of something far more sinister. And when police finally took a closer look at the house where Phoebe had been living, the place she had called home in her final days, what they discovered was something no teenager should ever be exposed to. Stepping into Jinjin's house of hell. This is just a hint of what will confront you behind this door. I can't prepare you enough for this. It's where Phoebe Bishop spent her final days. The conditions were beyond shocking, beyond comprehension. The only thing worse than the squalor is the stench. My goodness. The free-spirited 17-year-old who had moved away from her family seeking independence had instead been subjected to absolute filth and degradation by her housemates, Tenna Bramley and James Wood. It's not just what you see on the surface, it's what's rotting underneath as well. In every corner of the house, there's garbage, clothing. The sight is obviously disturbing, but the smell? It's just unbelievable. The air itself tastes dirty. This was where Phoebe had been staying. This was the environment she was living in during what would turn out to be her final days. Out of respect for her family and her memory, the details of what investigators found in her personal room remain sealed, too disturbing, too heartbreaking to share with the world. But the house itself told a story of neglect, control, and something much darker brewing beneath the surface. But even in that house of horrors, there were still reminders of a life that had been full of hope and promise. Still sitting on the printer, like a cruel mockery of what was to come, were posters alerting the public to Phoebe's disappearance. Posters that had allegedly been printed by Bramley and Wood themselves. The footage spoke volumes. Decay. A home where no teenager should have ever been forced to live. But that was only the beginning of what police would uncover. While the public was just starting to grasp the true severity of the situation, investigators were already digging much deeper. With Phoebe officially missing and no trace of her anywhere near the airport, Queensland Police launched a comprehensive investigation. From the very first moment, something felt fundamentally wrong. Her mother, Kylie, was adamant. Phoebe would never go completely silent, especially not on the day she was flying to see her boyfriend. It simply wasn't in her nature. Police brought the roommates back in for intensive questioning. When confronted about the glaring timeline discrepancy, the 2-hour gap that their surveillance footage had exposed, James suddenly changed his story entirely. He now claimed that Phoebe had suffered a panic attack that morning, so they had pulled over somewhere to let her cool down and collect herself. They left her alone in the car, and when they returned, she had simply vanished. According to this new version, they never actually went into the terminal. They never called her mother to report what had happened. They just drove away. The story was falling apart. Between May 23rd and May 27th, during the second week of the investigation, police obtained warrants and searched the house. What they found confirmed the horrifying conditions that had only been hinted at before. Neighbors had described the property as a dump, and that was putting it mildly. Trash was scattered everywhere. A school bus sat abandoned on the front lawn, covered in graffiti like some dystopian art installation. The smell of decay hung heavy in the air, so thick you could taste it. But inside the house? Inside was infinitely worse. Rotting food covered every surface. Feces were smeared across the walls. Razor blades lay scattered on the floor like lethal confetti, waiting to slice anyone who walked barefoot. Yet strangely, heartbreakingly, Phoebe's room was noticeably cleaner than the rest of the house. Her belongings were neatly packed, as if she fully planned to return from her trip to Perth. But her doorframe told a different story. It had been completely busted, as if someone had violently kicked it in. And outside in the yard, police made another disturbing discovery: 4 dead dogs. No explanation. No attempt to bury them or dispose of them properly. Just left to rot under the Australian sun. When news of these horrific conditions broke, local media tracked down the roommates for answers. Tenna, do you know anything about Phoebe's disappearance? Did you really drive her to the airport? What happened to Phoebe? Why were there dead dogs found on your property? The questions came rapid fire, but the answers never came. Before police had even searched the house, they had already conducted a thorough examination of Tenna's grey Hyundai. Inside the vehicle, they discovered a sawed-off shotgun, live ammunition, and 2 replica firearms. That discovery led to Tenna's immediate arrest on serious weapons charges. Based on the mounting evidence, both the vehicle and the home were formally declared active crime scenes. Meanwhile, public suspicion exploded across social media platforms. Online investigators began digging through Phoebe's most recent posts, searching for clues about her final days. What they found painted a heartbreaking picture of a young girl in emotional crisis. One post showed Phoebe sitting alone by the edge of a calm body of water, an image of solitude that would prove prophetic. The accompanying text read, "The hardest part about being the daughter that everyone's better off without and finds comfort away from home." The words revealed feelings of profound isolation, sadness, emotional displacement, and a crushing sense of being unwanted or fundamentally misunderstood by those who should have loved her most. Investigators also uncovered devastating text messages in which Phoebe described the house as a fucking hellhole and expressed that she couldn't wait to leave. In a recent text thread with her aunt, Phoebe had written with desperate urgency, "I'm flying the fuck out of here to see my boyfriend and I need to get out of this hellhole." She also revealed that she had begged her father to let her live with him instead, but his response had been a simple, crushing no. In a television interview, the aunt, who was estranged from Phoebe's mother, shed some heartbreaking light on her niece's chaotic upbringing. Phoebe was always moving from Queensland to New South Wales and back and forth. She was constantly changing schools. She had so many different stepdads coming in and out of her life. She never had anyone that she could really speak to, and they grew up in filth. No disrespect to anyone, because I grew up in Housing Commission too, but they lived like a typical struggling Housing Commission family. With mounting evidence pointing toward foul play and 2 adults under intense scrutiny, police were running out of time and leads. Phoebe hadn't just disappeared. She had been running from something, and whatever it was, it may have finally caught up with her. It had been over 2 weeks since Phoebe vanished without a trace. With no concrete answers and hope beginning to fade like morning mist, her mother made a public plea that would break hearts across the nation. "Hi, I'm Kylie. I'm Phoebe's mom. Our lives have been changed for the worst after the sudden disappearance of my daughter, who was last seen on May 15th. This is a pain no person or family should ever have to experience. Phoebe was a beautiful, loving, kind person, and every day not knowing where she is, where she's been, is absolutely devastating for us. This is why we are appealing to anyone with any information that may help bring Phoebe home to contact the police immediately. Even the smallest bit of information may be all the police need to find Phoebe. I would like to thank the police involved for their tireless efforts in looking for my daughter. They have kept me informed and are doing everything they can to find her. I also want to thank our community for their constant support and messages. I know that this investigation isn't over. It will not be over for me until we find Phoebe. I still hold hope that Phoebe will come home. But I have to consider the possibility that she won't. In the worst-case scenario, If the worst has happened, I at least need to know where she's resting. I need to know where Phoebe is. My daughter wouldn't just disappear. Someone knows something. And as a mom, I'm begging you to come forward with your information." The plea was raw, honest, and utterly heartbreaking. As days crawled by, the silence around Phoebe's disappearance grew increasingly deafening. Her family kept pushing for answers, demanding justice, refusing to let her memory fade. But the trail was growing colder by the hour. On June 4th, all public searches were officially called off by police. But investigators weren't giving up. Not even close. They remained laser-focused on the surveillance footage that had completely contradicted Tenna and James' initial timeline, footage showing their car leaving the airport area hours after they claimed to have dropped Phoebe off. More importantly, that same vehicle was never recorded returning. Instead, multiple cameras tracked it taking a deliberately obscure back road that led straight toward Goodnight Scrub National Park. Phone location data supported and confirmed this exact route. But upon closer inspection, investigators noticed something that sent chills down their spines. The vehicle had been deliberately, methodically altered. The Hyundai appeared in two different surveillance clips sporting two completely different license plates. One camera near the airport captured plate number 414EW3. Hours later, a camera positioned near Jinjin recorded the same vehicle now displaying plates reading 474BW8. Police also discovered that the distinctive Hyundai logo had been carefully removed and replaced with a makeshift Toyota badge. When investigators peeled back this amateur disguise, they found spray paint and tape underneath, clear evidence of deliberate deception. This was no mistake. No coincidence. It was calculated. Intentional. Planned. Police now believe with growing certainty that Phoebe never made it to the airport at all. Instead, they believe something far more sinister occurred that morning, that she was killed, possibly in the car itself, and her body was dumped in the wilderness, then later moved again to cover the tracks. Based on a devastating combination of physical evidence, digital forensics, and circumstantial proof that painted an undeniable picture, police moved swiftly. On June 5th, they arrested both Tenna Bramley and James Wood, charging them with 1 count of murder and 2 counts of interfering with a corpse. James Wood was marched from his cluttered caravan, his brief taste of freedom finally over. "Just listen to me," he pleaded desperately as officers took him into custody. Police immediately seized and towed the 4-wheel drive he'd been living out of, rushing it to forensic officers who would analyze every fiber, every surface, for any microscopic signs of death. His girlfriend, Tenna Bramley, was arrested at Bundaberg police station by detectives who, tellingly, referred to their alleged victim by her first name, a sign of how personal this case had become for the investigation team. Whilst we always hoped to find Phoebe alive, our investigation as it progressed quite clearly showed us that was not going to be a viable outcome. The accused weren't brought into the courtroom where Phoebe's sister was waiting, her heart shattered but her resolve unbroken. She was love. She's missed dearly. 3 weeks is too long for us as a family and all of our friends. We just want her home. Throughout the search, something kept pulling investigators back to that strange, deliberately obscure route Tenna's car had been captured taking on the morning Phoebe disappeared. It didn't lead to the airport. It led to a place called Goodnight Scrub National Park, a dense, remote, utterly unforgiving stretch of wilderness about an hour southwest of Bundaberg. At first, investigators kept the reason for focusing on this area quiet. But eventually, Detective Inspector Craig Mansfield confirmed the chilling truth. Phoebe's phone had pinged in that area. And not just once, there had been multiple hits, creating a digital breadcrumb trail that led straight into the heart of darkness. It was enough evidence to deploy cadaver dogs, surveillance drones, and dozens of search personnel deep into the unforgiving brush. And then, on June 6th at 2:30 in the afternoon, one of those specially trained dogs hit on something that would change everything. Roughly 5 miles from the park entrance, hidden in a thick, isolated patch of scrubland that few humans had ever set foot in, police made the grim discovery they had been dreading. It had taken them more than 3 weeks of relentless searching, but police were now confident they had found the remains of Phoebe Bishop. Her housemates remained in custody, charged with murdering the 17-year-old, then callously moving her body twice to avoid detection. We can take you inside the investigation and reveal the incredible stroke of luck that led to this devastating breakthrough. Off an unassuming path cutting through unrelentingly dense bushland lay what investigators now believe was a crime scene, the place where Phoebe Bishop's body had been dumped by her alleged killer housemates. Those remains have now been tested and examined further by our forensic capability. They've been identified as being human remains. Mobile phone data had led police to Goodnight Scrub National Park 2 weeks earlier. That initial search had been called off when police suspected that crucial evidence had been deliberately moved. Then, in what can only be described as a stroke of investigative intuition, a lone detective and a cadaver dog made the horrifying discovery. They had decided to scour a different track on pure instinct, because it looked similar to the site of the first search. That national park is vast and, as I've mentioned previously, it's absolutely unforgiving terrain. The second site is approximately 9 kilometers from the first, but it is within that area covered by the telecommunications data. Detectives weren't confirming how they believed Phoebe had died or whether a weapon had been used, but their confidence was unmistakable. We are satisfied that we have enough evidence to support our prosecution of these two accused. The 17-year-old's luggage and phone were still missing, and an alleged motive had not been revealed publicly. We always wanted to bring Phoebe home, and we believe that this is the first step in that process. The town of Gingin, once proudly judged Australia's friendliest town and the place where Phoebe had lived with Bramley and Wood, was absolutely reeling. A small shrine began growing outside the trio's former home, flowers and notes left by community members who couldn't comprehend how such evil had taken root in their midst. And from Phoebe's mother, just moments after the grim discovery was confirmed, came words that captured the agony of every parent's worst nightmare. I didn't think my heart could break any more than it did when you went missing, or when the charges were laid, but this is ripping me apart. As news of the arrests broke across local and national media, the reaction was immediate and intensely emotional. The town of Gingin was stunned into silence. People had been desperately clinging to hope, praying Phoebe would be found alive, hoping against hope that this wasn't what it appeared to be. But after weeks of silence, secrecy, and mounting suspicion, the terrible truth was finally sinking in. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore. This was a homicide. A young life cut brutally short. Phoebe's mother, Kylie, had taken to Facebook with daily posts counting the agonizing days her daughter had been gone, asking for answers, pleading with the community for help, for any information that might bring her baby home. And when police finally confirmed they'd found Phoebe's remains, Kylie said the words no parent should ever have to utter. I just need to know where she's resting. But even through her unimaginable grief, Kylie showed extraordinary grace. At a candlelight vigil held after the arrests, she asked the community not to take their anger and grief out on the accused family members or their children. They didn't make those choices, she said with remarkable composure. Phoebe would have wanted compassion. A moving vigil has been held in the small Queensland town, ripped apart by the tragic alleged murder of Phoebe Bishop. Among the attendees at last night's memorial were the SES and police search teams who had scoured the scrub for the missing teen. Her family, including her sister and mother, also made emotional speeches to a crowd of more than 300 people. I know Tenna has been charged. I know her family live within our community. And from living within our community, I expect them to receive respect, and I expect them to receive the respect that they deserve. They have not made the decisions that this woman is accused of. Phoebe's 17 years was never enough for her life. But in the short 17 years that she was with us, God, she gave us a run for our bloody money. She was a tough person, but she saw the good in everyone. As of the date of this investigation, James Wood and Tenna Bramley remain in custody, facing the full weight of the justice system. They've been charged with 1 count of murder and 2 counts of interfering with a corpse, charges that could see them imprisoned for life. Their next court appearance is scheduled for August 11, 2025. The full picture hasn't been revealed yet. The cause of death remains officially unknown, and forensic testing continues behind closed doors. But according to police, the case against them is rock solid, built on an unshakable foundation of phone records, surveillance footage, contradictory witness statements, and physical evidence collected from both the vehicle and that house of horrors. Detective Inspector Craig Mansfield stated it with chilling clarity. 3 people arrived near the airport. Only 2 people exited that vehicle. Then came another twist that sent shockwaves through the investigation. Kieran Daniel Mahoney, 30 years old, was charged on July 1st with 2 counts of accessory after the fact to murder in connection with Phoebe Bishop's case. Prosecutors alleged that Mahoney had used Phoebe's mobile phone to actively interfere with the police investigation, a calculated act designed to mislead and obstruct law enforcement efforts. Specifically, police claim he accessed and possibly manipulated data or the device itself to impede efforts to locate Phoebe and uncover the truth about what happened to her. The precise relationship between Mahoney and the primary accused hasn't been fully disclosed in public reports. However, the timing of the charges, just weeks after Tenna and James were arrested, strongly suggests he was part of their inner circle or had access to sensitive, incriminating information. While this development strongly implies coordination and conspiracy among multiple parties, no official source has confirmed the exact nature of their relationship or how deep the web of complicity runs. What we do know is that Mahoney has a confirmed court hearing scheduled for August 25th. At that hearing, it's possible that evidence summaries or sworn affidavits may finally outline the precise timeline of his involvement, revealing whether he was knowingly helping to conceal a murder, or if his actions were more peripheral and reactive, and most importantly, just how close he really was to the 2 main suspects. Even with this additional arrest, police remain firm in their position. As of now, Tenna Bramley and James would remain the only primary suspects in Phoebe's murder. What comes next is the grinding machinery of the legal process. Preliminary hearings. Possibly a lengthy trial. Maybe even plea deals struck in shadowy courthouse corridors. But one thing is absolutely certain, the world is watching. And so is Phoebe's family. Because this isn't just about justice anymore. It's about answers to questions that may haunt this community forever. What happened in that car on the morning of May 15th? Why didn't they call for help when a 17-year-old girl was in distress? What could have possibly occurred that morning to end a young life right as it was truly beginning? And maybe the hardest question of all, the one that will keep people awake at night, could any of this have been stopped? Phoebe Bishop was 17 years old. She had dreams. She had plans. She had a whole life stretching out before her like an unwritten story. Instead, she became another statistic. Another reminder that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones capable of the greatest betrayal. Her story isn't over yet. The legal proceedings will continue. The search for complete truth will go on. But for now, Phoebe is finally home. And her memory, that sunflower among wildflowers, will continue to shine long after the darkness that took her has been brought into the light.